In an earlier video, I showed you how to place the accents on an individual Greek word, either following the pattern of recessive accents for conjugated verb forms, or using the same accent rules to place the accent correctly on a verb, on a noun or adjective form with a persistent accent pattern. In this video, I'm going to show you how accents can change when words are placed in a phrase or a sentence. There's only a couple of very straightforward changes that can occur. The first, by far the most common, in the middle of a sentence, if a word ends with the rising sound that the acute accent indicates, before a word that's also accented, that final rising pitch is changed to the falling pitch of a grave accent. Let's take a simple example. Let's take a familiar word, the road, the way, hey, hodos. If it's a phrase by itself, the article hey doesn't have an accent. If we just have this individual word, hodos, no reason to alter the accent. It stays just the way it is. But let's put this same phrase in the accusative case, the road, the path, the way. Accusative. Tain hodon. By itself, the article would have an acute accent, but it's followed by a word that has an accent on it. So we're going to change this rising pitch to the falling pitch. And as a phrase, tain hodon then will look like this with a grave accent on tain, and then we can leave the accent on hodon unchanged. This rule applies in the middle of a phrase or a sentence. If in an entire sentence, a sentence usually will begin will not begin with a falling pitch. It won't end with a falling pitch. So the first or last word of a sentence can retain its acute accent even if the following word is accented. Let's take a very short sentence that illustrates the whole range of possibility. Let's with the poet Memnermus, ask the question, what is pleasure? Tide terpnon. Each of these words would normally be accented with an acute on the final syllable. The interrogative pronoun t, what, is the beginning word of the sentence. It's not going to change its accent. So those interrogative pronouns, tis, t, are going to retain their accent at the introduction of a question at the beginning of a sentence, no matter what comes after. Terpnon is the final word of the sentence. There's nothing after it, so we can leave its accent unchanged. But this coordinating particle, de, is followed by an accented word, so we're going to change that rising acute to a falling grave. And the final form of our question, tide terpnon, would look like this, correctly accented. Let's note one other case where you might run into a series of words, and just make sure that this simple rule, a final rising accent, acute on the last syllable, is changed to a grave only when the next word is accented. What if we have our word hodos, road, way, but it's followed by the indefinite pronoun tis? Some road, some way. Now, tis is an enclitic. It doesn't have an accent of its own. So there's no reason to alter the accent of hodos. We only need to change that accent if the following word itself has an accent. Tis is one of a handful of small number of words, common words, called enclitics. They don't have accents of their own. And just briefly, there are only a couple of things you need to consider to understand whether an enclitic word is going to affect the accent of any words around it. They're called enclitics because they lean back on the previous word. Let's take a look at how this works. There are really only two things you need to think about to understand whether an enclitic is going to affect the accent of a word it's leaning back on. The first thing to look at is, does the preceding word have an acute accent on the penult, the next to last syllable? Let's take an example. Anthropou, if we have the genitive case, anthropos, of a person. In the genitive case, acute accent on the next to last syllable. In this case, when you have an enclitic that's 2 syllables long, let's say we have the phrase of some person, an indefinite person, this is the one instance where the enclitic kind of gets an accent of its own. Preceding word has an acute on the penult, 2-syllable enclitic takes an accent on its final syllable. So anthropou tenos, of some person. If you have a word with an acute accent on the penult, and you have a 1-syllable enclitic, let's say a sentence or phrase like somebody indefinite says, we still have an acute on the next to last syllable, but this is a 1-syllable enclitic, no change. Legetis, somebody says, as opposed to anthropou tenos, of a person, belonging to a person. This is the first kind of rule you have to think about. And then after that, so this is sort of situation number 1. Look at the next to last syllable, and if it has an acute, apply an accent only if there's a 2-syllable enclitic after it. Once you've looked at that, any other case, the question is very simple. Is there an accent on the final syllable? And if there's not, the enclitic leans back and lends an accent, so to speak, to the preceding word. So let's just look at a couple of examples. Let's take the word for gift, doron. Now, it does not have an acute on the next to last syllable, so we're in situation number 2 here. If we have an indefinite pronoun after it, some gift, we have an open syllable. The final syllable doesn't have an accent on it, therefore we're going to add a second accent on doron. Doronte as a phrase is correctly accented. The enclitic is leaning back and lending its accent to the preceding word. Or let's take another familiar kind of pattern, a simple noun, anthropos. So the nominative case of anthropos, a person, if we have an enclitic word after that, such as the indefinite pronoun tis, a person. It's not our first situation. We don't have an acute on the penult. And we then look at the final syllable. Sure enough, there's no accent on it. So we'll add the accent there. And anthropostis will be the correct accentuation of this phrase. That's the whole story of enclitics. They're sometimes made to sound very complicated. This is really the summary. Look at the penult. If it has an acute on it, accent a 2-syllable enclitic. Otherwise, leave it alone. Any other situation, look at the preceding word. If the last syllable has no accent, the enclitic leans back and lends an acute accent to that syllable. Let me just give you one slightly longer example, and we can see how this can play out in a longer phrase or sentence. I want to take a little phrase from Book 4 of Thucydides and see how we would accent that. So in this extract from a slightly longer sentence, Thucydides is making a statement, if, let's see if I can get this, if any place, eputis tena edon, eputis tena edoi ekthron. And the sentence continues. If any place at all, anybody saw any enemy in enclitic, we have a whole series of enclitics here in this if clause of a long sentence. If anybody saw any of the enemy, any place, it was not a good thing for their enemy. But how are we going to accent this? Pu is enclitic, but we don't fall back and change the accent on a. Tis enclitic looks back and says, there's no accent on the last syllable of the preceding word. Tina is enclitic. It looks back and says, there's no accent on the last syllable of the preceding word. And we wind up with a pu tis tina idoi ekthon as the correctly accented chain. accents for the enclitic leaning back to the last syllable of the preceding word. So just keep those two simple situations in mind and check the next to last syllable. If you have an enclitic, preceding word has a acute on the penult, accent a two-syllable enclitic, leave one syllable enclitics alone. Otherwise, lean back on the preceding word whenever the last syllable is unaccented. That'll take care of enclitics. Other words that have accents on the final syllable will change the rising acute to a falling grave when the subsequent word is accented. That'll take care of most of your accent problems when you're looking at correctly accented individual words in the context of a phrase or sentence.